On Christmas Eve in 2008, 45-year-old Bruce Jeffrey Pardo arrived at his ex-wife's house in California wearing a Santa Claus suit and carrying multiple firearms. When the front door was opened by an 8-year-old girl, he shot her in the face before opening fire at a crowded family Christmas party. Bruce then unleashed a homemade fuel dispensing device hidden inside a wrapped present, igniting a massive fire that trapped victims inside as the house burned. 9 people were killed, some by gunfire, and others burned so badly that it took investigators several days to identify them. The fire burned so intensely that parts of Bruce's Santa suit melted onto his skin, forcing him to flee while still on fire. He later drove to his brother's house, where he turned the gun on himself. Investigators later determined the attack was driven by rage over a recent divorce, mounting financial pressure after losing his job, and a bitter custody dispute, with Bruce specifically targeting his ex-wife and her family. Police discovered that he'd spent months preparing, stockpiling weapons, booby-trapping vehicles with explosives, and compiling a list of additional targets, including his ex-wife's divorce attorney, making the attack one of the most disturbing holiday massacres in U.S. history. This was one of the last known photos taken of rapper XXXTentacion, moments before he was fatally shot during a robbery outside a Florida motorcycle dealership in June of 2018. Investigators determined it was not a targeted hit job, but a robbery gone wrong after suspects spotted his luxury vehicle and expensive Louis Vuitton bag. Released surveillance footage showed 2 gunmen approaching his car, demanding the bag and opening fire when he resisted. The 20-year-old artist, born Jose Onfroy, was shot multiple times at close range and died shortly after at a nearby hospital. In 2023, 3 men were convicted of his first-degree murder and armed robbery. Beatrice Flamini spent 500 days completely alone inside a cave nearly 230 feet underground, cut off from sunlight, clocks, and all human contact as part of an experiment on extreme isolation. She entered the cave in November of 2021 and did not emerge until April of 2023, with no communication with the outside world during that time. Scientists monitoring her remotely had found that her circadian rhythm had completely collapsed, with severe sleep disruption, memory lapses, and slowed cognition developing over time. Flamini later described moments of mental detachment and sensory distortion, and when she finally resurfaced, she genuinely believed she'd only been underground for about 160 days, illustrating how prolonged isolation can fundamentally fracture the brain's sense of time and reality. During a low-speed car crash in Georgia, what should have been a routine airbag deployment turned into a life-altering injury for Hannah Oliver. The collision occurred at roughly 25 miles per hour, but when the airbag deployed, it shattered the designer glasses she was wearing, driving fragments into her eye. Doctors later determined the damage was irreversible and Hannah went blind in that eye. But in the aftermath, she channeled the trauma into action, later launching a shatter-resistant sunglasses brand to prevent the same injury from happening to others. A young Arkansas couple pleaded guilty after attempting to sell their 2-month-old baby at a campground for $1,000 and a 6-pack of beer. The deal was written out in a handwritten contract and witnessed by others, one of whom alerted police. Authorities recovered the infant and charged the parents with child endangerment and attempting to accept compensation for adoption. The father was sentenced to prison time while the mother received probation, and both were permanently barred from contact with the child, who was placed in protective care. June 5, 1986, 24-year-old New York City model Marla Hanson was asked by her landlord Stephen Roth to meet outside a Manhattan bar to collect an $850 security deposit he owed her. As they walked away, Hanson was ambushed by 2 men Roth had hired. One attacker restrained her head while the other slashed her face with razor blades, carving deep wounds across her cheeks as Roth stood by and watched. The attack required more than 150 stitches, leaving her with permanent disfigurement that effectively ended her modeling career. Hanson survived after extensive reconstructive surgery, and investigators later determined that Roth had ordered the attack after she rejected his romantic advances. He and the 2 attackers were convicted and sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. Hanson said the trauma continued in court, where a defense attorney subjected her to a vicious and humiliating cross-examination, attacking her credibility, accusing her of manipulating men, and suggested she had falsely identified her attackers due to her being racist, an experience she described as worse than the physical attack itself. Real estate agent Todd Kohlhepp became known as the Amazon Review Killer after investigators uncovered sarcastic product reviews he had posted that referenced his real crimes. For years, he joked about using knives, chains, and shovels while remaining unidentified. In 2016, police traced the disappearance of Kayla Brown to his rural South Carolina property, where she was found alive, chained inside a shipping container after Kohlhepp had already murdered her boyfriend. A search of the land revealed multiple buried bodies, and Kohlhepp later confessed to killing 7 people between 2003 and 2016, including 4 victims in a long cold motorcycle shop massacre. Kim Stanger is a criminal law researcher in Ohio who lives with an extremely rare neurological condition that leaves her with no sense of touch, pain, or temperature. Her peripheral nerves don't transit any sensory signals, meaning she cannot feel injuries, burns, or pressure on her body. Doctors have described her as the only living person documented with a complete loss of somatosensation at this level. As a result, Stanger must visually monitor her body at all times to avoid unknowingly injuring herself, as even severe wounds or extreme temperatures provide no physical warning. This was the moment when British comedian Tommy Cooper suddenly collapsed mid-performance on live television, and millions of viewers believed it was just part of his act. On April 15, 1984, Cooper was performing on Live from Her Majesty's when he suddenly slunk behind a stage curtain. His entire career had conditioned audiences to laugh at physical mishaps, so the crowd applauded and laughed as his body lay motionless on the floor. Witnesses later said he could be heard making loud snoring sounds, caused by labored, irregular breathing as his airway partially collapsed. The orchestra continued playing and the stage lights remained up, reinforcing the belief that nothing was wrong. Even producers assumed it was a gag and didn't stop the show. In reality, Cooper was suffering a massive heart attack and remained on the stage alone for several minutes as laughter continued before paramedics were finally called. He was eventually pronounced dead shortly after arriving at Westminster Hospital, as the audience had been completely unaware that they were laughing at a man who was going through his agonizing final moments. This was the horrifying moment a young child was nearly killed by her bus driver when she became trapped after her backpack was caught in the closing door of a Kentucky school bus as she was getting off. The driver then pulled away without noticing, dragging the child alongside the moving bus for hundreds of feet. Luckily, honking bystanders eventually caught the bus driver's attention and she was forced to come to an abrupt stop. The girl suffered serious physical injuries including nerve damage, requiring nearly a dozen surgeries and skin grafts, along with lasting psychological trauma. Court filings noted that she was a special needs student and argued that the bus route, supervision, and safety procedures in place were not appropriate for her needs. The bus driver was removed from duty and later fired, and the school district acknowledged failures in safety oversight. Years later, the child, publicly identified as Allie Rednauer, is back on her feet but continues to deal with ongoing physical and emotional effects and continued medical care. The case ultimately ended with a nearly $5 million settlement, and Allie and her family have since spoken out, pushing for mandatory school bus safety upgrades and warning that without changes, another child could be seriously injured or killed in the same way. For years, rumors circulated that prostitutes who went to a pig farm outside of Vancouver never came back. That's because Canadian serial killer Robert Pickton was murdering them on his property. From the late 1980s to the early 2000s, dozens disappeared after being lured there, where they were killed, dismembered, and fed to the pigs. DNA from multiple victims was later found scattered across the farm, and in 2007, Pickton was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to life, though prosecutors argued he killed at least 26 women. According to court records and police testimony, Pickton told an undercover police officer posing as a cellmate that he had killed 49 women and was upset he was caught right before making it to 50. Benjamin Guggenheim was a wealthy American industrialist traveling aboard the Titanic in 1912. As the ship sank, he refused a lifeboat, insisting that women and children go first. He reportedly changed into evening clothes with his valet and prepared to die on board the ship. Before disappearing below deck, Guggenheim is said to have asked a survivor to tell his family that he, quote, played the game straight to the end and that no woman or child was left behind because Ben Guggenheim was a coward. His body was never recovered. Comedy legend Artie Lang survived one of the most self-destructive spirals in modern celebrity. In January of 2010, after years of severe heroin addiction, he stabbed himself multiple times in the abdomen inside his Hoboken apartment, collapsing from internal bleeding and barely surviving emergency surgery. His addiction later led to overdoses, constant arrests, homelessness, and the collapse of his nasal septum as a result of long-term cocaine abuse, permanently disfiguring his face. Thankfully, in recent years, Lang has said he's sober, lives mostly out of the spotlight, and prioritizes stability and health over returning to fame. In 2000, 2007, Shelley Miscavige, the wife of Scientology leader David Miscavige, and once one of the organization's most powerful figures, attended her father's funeral and then completely vanished from public view. She's not been seen, photographed, or heard from publicly ever since. In 2013, actress and Scientology defector Leah Remini filed a missing persons report, prompting the LAPD to state they had located Shelley and confirmed she was alive and safe, though no evidence, images, or details were released, and no independent verification has ever occurred. Former Scientology members allege she was removed from leadership and confined to a secret church facility due to internal conflicts with David, claims which the organization vehemently denies, leaving her disappearance unresolved nearly 2 decades later. November 13, 1982, Duck Koo Kim fought Ray Mancini for the WBA lightweight title in Las Vegas. In the 14th round, Kim was knocked down hard and the fight was stopped. Minutes later, he collapsed from a massive brain hemorrhage, fell into a coma, and died 4 days later at age 27. Then, just a couple months later, in early 1983, Kim's mother died by suicide after traveling to the U.S. and struggling with her son's death. Just a few months after that, referee Richard Green also took his own life after reportedly falling into severe depression, overwhelmed by guilt and public blame for not stopping the fight sooner. The bout became one of the darkest moments in boxing history and directly led to major safety reforms and the elimination of 15-round title fights. In 1977, unemployed Indiana man Tony Karitzis kidnapped mortgage banker Richard Hall after blaming him for the foreclosure of his home. Tony strapped a sawed-off shotgun to Richard's neck, rigged with a dead man trigger so any sudden movement could fire it, and held him hostage inside the Meridian Mortgage Company for nearly 3 days. During the standoff, Richard was forced to walk outside in public and even stand through a live press conference with the gun still pressed against his neck. With negotiations failing and Richard's life constantly at risk, police ended the siege by shooting Tony through a window, killing him instantly as Richard survived unharmed. Here's a 2021 photo of Alec Baldwin breaking down in tears after firing a prop gun that killed the director of photography on the movie set of Rust. The tragic incident happened as a result of catastrophic failures in safety procedures on the set. The woman who was responsible for checking the firearms was only 24 years old and had very little experience in her role. Rust was her second film as lead armorer, since she had previously worked on another Western film called The Old Way, where she received multiple safety complaints from the cast and crew. She also admitted on a podcast that she felt overwhelmed and underprepared for her job on Rust. The live round that killed Helena Hutchins and injured Joel Souza was not supposed to be on the set at all. The production had a very strict rule that banned any live ammunition on the premises, and only blanks or dummy rounds could be used. But it was later revealed that some of the crew members used the same guns for target practice with live rounds during their off hours, and had failed to properly clean and inspect the weapons before returning them to the armory. These are the hands of Japanese serial killer Tsutomu Miyazaki. He was born with a rare birth defect that caused his hand joints to be fused together, preventing him from being able to bend his wrists upwards. Two Mice Eating Cheese is the name of London's smallest statue, which commemorates 2 construction workers who died in 1862. They were scuffling over a missing sandwich that resulted in both of them falling off the scaffolding. Turns out it was just stolen by mice. The movie Jaws directly contributed to a surge in shark hunting and a massive drop in shark populations. Author Peter Benchley deeply regretted writing Jaws, saying, "Knowing what I know now, I could never write that book today. Sharks don't target human beings, and they certainly don't hold grudges." Today, sharks kill only around 10 humans per year, but humans kill around 11,000 sharks every hour. A 34-year-old man with ALS completely lost the ability to move anything, including his eyes. When a brain chip finally allowed him to communicate again, the first thing he said was, "I need a beer." There's typically an IQ minimum of 80 points to serve in the US military. But to meet the manpower requirements of the Vietnam War, the US Army loosened up on this policy and began recruiting soldiers with mental disabilities. These men were known as McNamara's morons and died at 5 times the rate of other Americans in the war. This is also what the character Forrest Gump was based on. In 1943, Polish ballerina Francesca Mann arrived at Auschwitz. When ordered to take off her clothes, she did so provocatively to divert the attention of the guards. While the roll call officer was distracted, she grabbed his gun and shot the man in the head. She then managed to wound another guard before other prisoners joined her rebellion until they were all shot dead. During the 1980s, Rebecca Schaeffer was the star of the popular CBS sitcom My Sister Sam. But in 1989, she was fatally shot in the doorway of her West Hollywood apartment by an obsessed fan who had been stalking her for over 3 years. The 21-year-old's death led to the passing of some of the first anti-stalking laws in America. Here's a photo of the unidentified victims of John Wayne Gacy being laid to rest at a mass funeral. In 2006, 18-year-old Ryan Waller was shot in the face during a Phoenix home invasion. His girlfriend was killed, but Ryan somehow survived. However, police mistakenly treated Ryan as a suspect, not a victim. Despite a severe bullet wound in his head, Ryan was interrogated for hours and denied medical treatment. He eventually passed away as a result of the horrific negligence. In September of 2008, Blink-182 drummer Travis Barker survived a plane crash that killed 4 out of the 6 people on board. He suffered third-degree burns over 65% of his body and underwent 16 surgeries over an 11-week span. Travis was in so much pain that he repeatedly called friends and offered them over $1 million to help him end his own life. A prion disease called kuru can be contracted when a human consumes another human's brain. It was typically found in cannibals from New Guinea who would consume the brains of their dead relatives as part of a funerary ritual. The fatal disease would slowly form holes in the victims' brains and cause them to laugh uncontrollably. When Theo Von was born in 1980, his dad Roland was 70 years old. Theo says he was always afraid to develop a relationship with Roland because he knew his dad would die when he was at a young age. His father ended up dying in an accidental shooting accident when Theo was 16 years old. British man Andrew Haig was sentenced to life in prison earlier this year after beating his 50-year-old neighbor to death with a bag of Pokemon cards. In 2012, Texas nurse Kimberly Sains was sentenced to life in prison after killing 5 of her patients by injecting bleach into their dialysis lines. Here are some of the distress calls that were painted onto houses during Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Many refused to evacuate their homes because they weren't allowed to bring any pets into sheltering areas. The Category 5 hurricane ended up taking the lives of around 1,400 people and 500,000 pets. Grady Stiles Jr. was born in 1937 with a rare genetic condition known as ectrodactyly, which gave him claw-like hands and feet. He became a circus performer under the name Lobster Boy, but was known to be a viciously abusive alcoholic in person. In 1978, he was convicted of murdering his daughter's fiancé on the day before their wedding. He openly confessed to the murder but wasn't sent to prison since no state institution had the resources for an inmate with his condition. Stiles continued to perform until 1992 when he was murdered by a hitman hired by his wife and son. In 2019, Florida man Grant Amato murdered his mother, father, and brother and tried to stage it as a murder-suicide committed by his brother. But police didn't buy his story when they found out his parents were threatening to kick him out of their house over his severe porn addiction. He had stolen over $200,000 from them and spent it all on a cam model from Bulgaria. In 1916, a Tennessee circus elephant named Mary murdered her handler by crushing his head on his second day of the job. The circus owner then decided to publicly execute the 6,000-pound elephant by hanging her from a crane. After she was killed in front of a crowd of 2,500 men, women, and children, an autopsy revealed that she had a severely infected tooth that was likely the cause of her murderous rage. In 2011, Chicago man Robert Lyons bludgeoned his mother with a champagne bottle before relentlessly stabbing her and pouring chemicals all over her body. He did this all because she refused to buy him skybox tickets for an upcoming Avril Lavigne concert. Robert was 39 years old at the time. In 2022, 70-year-old Maya Murma was collecting water in India when an elephant suddenly trampled her. She was quickly rushed to the hospital, but ended up dying from her catastrophic injuries. When family members gathered for her funeral, the same elephant appeared, threw Murmu's body into the air, and trampled it again. In 2021, University of Missouri student Danny Santoli was rushing to become a new member of the Phi Gamma Delta fraternity. Knowing the process was hard on him, his family urged him to back out, but he wanted to prove himself to the fraternity bros. On October 19th of that year, the fraternity held their Pledge Father Reveal Night, which would end up going down as one of the worst hazing disasters in American history. Along with the other pledges, Danny was blindfolded and led down to a basement where he was force-fed beer through a tube and told to finish an entire 750 of Tito's vodka. Around midnight, Danny was sitting on the couch in extreme distress with a blood alcohol level of 0.468, nearly 6 times the legal limit. Soon enough, Danny became unresponsive and was rushed to the hospital in cardiac arrest. He was later declared brain dead as a result of alcohol poisoning and spent the next 8 months in the hospital. He's now blind, unable to walk, talk, or do virtually anything by himself. 11 members of the frat were criminally charged for the horrific incident. In 1955, 24-year-old actor James Dean died in a car crash while driving his Porsche 550 Spider, which he nicknamed Little Bastard. After the accident, the car was towed to a garage in Los Angeles, and while it was being repaired, it fell off its jack and crushed a mechanic's legs. The engine and transmission were later sold to 2 professional racers, both of whom later crashed their vehicles during the same race and were seriously injured. The car's tires were also sold, and the new owner was eventually killed in yet another car crash. Over time, the stories of deaths and injuries associated with the car led to rumors of a curse. Some believed that the car was haunted and that anyone who came into contact with it would suffer misfortune. But in 1960, the car disappeared while being transported from Miami to Los Angeles. The car has never been found, and its whereabouts remain a mystery to this day. This was one of the last photos captured of Steve Jobs, the genius behind Apple. It was taken just a few days before he passed away from pancreatic cancer on October 5, 2011. During World War I, 20-year-old French soldier Albert Roche was found sleeping on duty and was sentenced to death for abandoning his post. But thankfully, a messenger arrived just moments before his execution to tell the full story. Albert had crawled for nearly 10 hours under enemy fire to rescue his wounded captain before passing out from exhaustion. In 2013, a Chinese businessman hired a hitman to take out his competitor for $282,000. But the hitman hired another hitman to do the job, offering $141,000. That man then hired another hitman, who hired another hitman, who hired another hitman. The 5th hitman, who was offered $14,000 for the job, tried convincing the target to fake his own death. But instead, he reported the threat to authorities, and all 6 men, including the original businessman, were sent to prison. As a child, Robert Downey Jr. was always surrounded by drugs. His father introduced him to marijuana when he was only 6 years old and allowed him to start drinking once he turned 8. By the time he became a teenager, Robert had already been addicted to cocaine, heroin, and prescription pills. RDJ struggled with these demons for more than 30 years before finally deciding to turn his life around in 2003. This was the last photo taken of Semra Aysel before she was pushed off the cliff by her husband Hakan. The pregnant 31-year-old fell for more than 1,000 feet and died immediately along with her unborn child. In 2013, an 8-year-old girl found the lifeless bodies of her parents, brother, and grandmother in her basement. They were apparently poisoned by highly toxic gas emitting from rotten potatoes after going down one by one to check on the person who went down before them. The only reason the girl didn't die was because her grandma must have left the door open before dying, allowing the gas to dissipate. To lose a third of his body weight for his role in The Machinist, where he weighed 120 pounds, Christian Bale pushed his body to extreme limits, consuming nothing but coffee, a can of tuna, and a single apple every day. His goal was to reach 100 pounds before producers had to stop him so that he wouldn't die, and the movie ended up being a total flop. He then had to regain 100 pounds in 6 months to star in Batman Begins, but then had to lose 30 pounds again before filming because he'd bulked too much. In 1996, 7-year-old Jessica Dubroff tried to fly an airplane across the United States but crashed during a thunderstorm. This resulted in a law banning children from flying. In 1987, Andy the Goose was born without feet, so his owner eventually fitted him with Nike sneakers to help him walk, turning him into a famous role model for disabled kids. But one day in 1991, Andy disappeared from home and was found in a local park the next day with his wings and head ripped off. Police were able to identify the killer but didn't reveal their identity to the public. According to a 2014 investigation, the car that Paul Walker died in had tires that were 9 years old. This likely contributed to Paul's racer friend losing control while driving around a corner at 93 miles per hour. It's a tragic example of why you should always change your tires after 6 years no matter how much they've been used. Roughly 200 people die on cruise ships each year, especially on those that carry a lot of seniors. So most ships have a small morgue on board prepared to store up to 10 bodies. In November of 2021, zipline instructor Joaquin Romero fell to his death after sacrificing himself to save a customer. He had to let go of the zipline because he knew it would be too heavy to hold both he and his client, so he decided that he would be the one to die. After a tiger escaped from a Georgia zoo and killed a man in 2015, a PSA was issued on what not to do if you ever encounter a tiger. Don't approach it, don't run away, and definitely don't urinate. In an attempt to escape a forceful arranged marriage with her cousin, 21-year-old Pakistani woman Asia Bibi poisoned a container of milk at a family party, hoping that only her fiancé would drink it. But instead, it was used by Bibi's mother-in-law to make a dessert drink for the entire family. It was then served to 27 members of Bibi's family, killing 17 of them. In 2017, a 9 weeks pregnant Brazilian woman suffered a stroke and was declared legally dead. Although doctors said the babies had no hope for survival, the brain-dead woman was kept alive for 123 days before delivering a healthy pair of twins. After growing up with a chronically bloated stomach, Sanju Bhagat went to the ER in 2006 with severe abdominal pain and difficulty breathing. Doctors were astonished to discover that the twin he must have absorbed in utero was still living in his abdomen and surviving off his blood supply. The half-formed twin had limbs, long fingernails, hair, and even genitalia. Doctors eventually removed the parasite and Bhagat made a full recovery. George Wallace was a governor of Alabama who openly supported Jim Crow and segregation. Once his term was over, he helped get his wife elected so that he could subvert his term limit and stay in office. To do so, he kept her cancer diagnosis a secret from her, knowing that the treatment would negatively affect her ability to run. Thus, the first female governor of Alabama died within 200 days of her term. Dewey the cat died in 1910, but meant enough to his owner to be honored with a gravestone that still stands 113 years later. It reads, "He was only a cat, but he was human enough to be a great comfort in hours of loneliness and pain." In 1950, herpetologist Kevin Budden caught a deadly taipan snake by hand and hitchhiked to town while holding it. At some point, he lost his grip and was bitten, but managed to bag the snake and made a random truck driver promise to get it to researchers. Kevin succumbed to the venom the next day, but the driver kept his promise, and the snake was used to create the first taipan antivenom in history. In 2010, 80-year-old Maria de Jesus Arroyo was pronounced dead after suffering a heart attack and brought to an LA morgue. A few days later, morticians returned to pull her body from the freezer and found her corpse suddenly covered in bruises as if she was beaten up. It was later determined that she was still alive and tried to get out, breaking her nose in the process, but she eventually froze to death. In 2013, Zac Efron was running through his house with socks on when he suddenly slipped. He smashed his face into the corner of a granite fountain so hard that it shattered his jaw and nearly killed him. He was immediately knocked unconscious, and when he woke up, part of his chin was hanging off his face. In response to more recent plastic surgery rumors, Zac claimed that his cheek muscles overgrew to compensate for the muscles that were permanently damaged from that injury. Union Army soldier Jacob Miller was shot in the forehead during the Civil War. Left for dead, he somehow woke up a few hours later and lived on for another 54 years. Mac Ray Evans was a serial killer who used to work for Caltrans throughout the 1950s and 60s. He'd bury his victims, who were mostly children, in places where he would later help build the highways on top of. Many of his victims were never found and are likely still under some of the California highways that thousands of people drive over each day.